Good morning, dear friends. Welcome. It is Tuesday, Beis Iyar, May 3rd, and we are here today to study the entire Talmud, one page, one line at a time. And today is not just any other day, because today we're starting a new parak, a new chapter of Gemara, of Masechet Shabbos, the 16th chapter Kol Kisvei HaKodesh, and we are presently on page 115, Kuf Tes Vav Amud Aleph in the Gemara. Today is Beis Iyar, so before we start, I should point out today is an important day on the Chabad calendar. Yes, there are a few of those days. Today is the birthday of the fourth Chabad Rebbe, the Rebbe Maharash, who was the son of the Tzemach Tzedek, who was the third Chabad Rebbe. He was the youngest son of the Tzemach Tzedek, and he ends up, Tzemach Tzedek was a prolific Torah scholar, Hasidic master, as well as halachist. He has a famous work of Shalot Utshuvot called the Tzemach Tzedek, which is likely why he's known as such. Famously, the word Tzemach Tzedek is the gematria, by the way, of Menachem Mendel, as is Tzemach Tzedek, the gematria of Menachem Mendel, when you add a yud, which is another way of spelling the name Menachem Mendel. And so there are multiple tzaddikim with similar names, but his father was the Tzemach Tzedek. He was born the second day of Iyar, and he lived a relatively short life, and he was known for having a different style than the other Chabad Rebbes, in that he lived a lifestyle of opulence and external presentations of wealth and riches. Before he became Rebbe, he became independently wealthy with different businesses. And actually, famously, when people, Hasidim, would give gifts to the Tzemach Tzedek, he'd say, I don't have any need for this. You can give it to my son, the Maharash. He was renowned, even among the other Rebbes in the Chabad dynasty, as being a miracle worker. There are many miracles that happened in his career. And he was known, and this the Lubavitcher Rebbe made famous about him for a saying that says, Milichatchila a river. Maybe you've heard that. Some people say that you first try to wiggle around an issue, then if you have no choice, you take it head on. And he said, no, from the outset, be ambitious, be proactive, and think big and act big. And that was a motto of his that the Rebbe made very famous. There's actually a famous Hasidic melody called Lichatchila River, and it was a melody that he composed or favored. And there are those who understand Nigunim and Nagina better than I do, say that the song itself conveys a theme of a person achieving a challenge and then taking it on in an optimistic and ambitious manner. But that's it for today's intro. It is already 10:10. Let us get started. We're starting a new parak, and we're gonna uncover a lot of things that we find interesting. I believe that I find interesting. We're gonna learn this together, and I do want to point out, as we'll see soon, there are a number of facets of this. The first discussion we're going to have today that are no longer relevant halacha l'maisa, as we'll discuss. So, as usual, what I want to propose is we'll study the Mishnah and the Gemara first, without us trying to think too hard about contemporary halachic application, and then afterwards we'll explore the varying halachic authorities, and we'll try to see it in the Shulchan Aruch and the like. But let's try for today to allow this to be more of an abstract discussion. And so we're going to envision a person who has a fire in his home or in his chutzner 2,000 years ago, sometime, or 1,800 years ago, sometime in the era of the Mishnah and the Gemara. And then we can talk about how this translates to today. We're going to share the screen and get started. So here we go. We started the Mishnah yesterday. We'll start again. Kol Kisvei HaKodesh. All holy ksavim, all holy writings. What are all holy writings? So if we would use that word today, it might be very expansive. But Rashi tells us, Kol Kisvei HaKodesh means all the works of Tanakh. Rashi, Kegoin Torah, Neviim Uksuvim. V'loi Teima Torah L'chud, Hu Deshari L'mitrach. Don't say that we are talking exclusively about v'chamisha chumshei Torah latzuli v'lo yishar asarim. So we're talking about the permissibility of saving all the works of Tanakh mipnei hadaleka from a fire. Rashi matzilim oisam. Basically, long story short, we're talking about a complicated space, either a home or a mavoi, a courtyard that is not entirely halachically a public domain. It's lacking an eruv, but it is otherwise structured in a way that it's not a thoroughfare, and so it's not a rishus harabim. It's a place that one is prohibited from carrying in a rishus hayachid. I'm sorry. It's a place that midrabanan you're not allowed to carry, says Rashi. And in such a space, you're allowed to do that which is typically not permitted because of the fire and the importance of this farm and some other theories and ideas that we're going to talk about shortly. Which books can be saved, but whether or regardless of a work that one is permitted to read, and Rashi says publicly, or not read publicly. Rashi, bein shekarim behem, kigoy neviim shemaftirim behem b'Shabbos b'beis haknesses. So we discussed yesterday, but we're repeating. The Chumash is read in shul. Navi is read in shul publicly, where by Haftorah. Bein shekarim behem, and a book that is not read is Kisuvim. Kisuvim does not have a public forum for reading in the shul. Rabbeinu Levi Omar dafilu yichidim in karim behem. And perhaps a different take, or maybe an elaboration. Right now, Levi says that Ksuvim cannot be read even privately. So not only they don't have a forum for public study, they mustn't be read on Shabbos. Because there was a takana, as the Mishnah itself says, that there was a takana that people had to gather in shul to study the relevant halachas, and therefore they were not allowed to read matters that would possibly distract. Doctor, yes, go ahead.
Could you define rescue? I mean, the fire is burning in your house, and now, okay, there are no human beings left. So then you have. Let me get rid of this. Then you have animals. I'm just giving, hypothetically. Okay, the animals are out. So now maybe it's not burning heavily enough not to go in. There's some smoke. You have all of your books, you have holy books, and you have secular books. You have paintings that are worth a lot of money. You have silverware. You have your lectern from Shabbos. What does it mean? Can you get the other stuff? Is it a priority that you have to give to these Sfarim? What's the story?
So there is a discussion about what one can save from a fire. I'm going to leave it a little vague now. It's going to be frustrating. I'm going to leave it vague now. Right now, we're talking particularly about these Sfarim, but there are other discussions in other places about other things that are very valuable, and sometimes other items as well may be saved because, well, for example, Beryl pointed out the other day, there's certain amounts of food that can be saved under similar situations, and other high value items as well. So
I actually learned this last night. Can I answer it, Rabbi?
What?
I actually learned this last night. Would you mind if I answer?
Okay, you're welcome to go ahead. Yes. Although I don't want to go too far down.
Basically, in the olden times, the houses weren't attached like it is now. The houses were far apart. So if the house was burning on Shabbos, God forbid, a million times, is you have to let the house burn. That's the law. Only if it's Pituach Nefesh.
Okay, good. But what can you save from the house?
What could you save? Technically, anything that you want to. If you could save whatever you can, you could.
Is there a priority, though? I mean,
it's depends what you call priority. Is money priority to you? Is jewelry priority to you? Food,
right?
Sefarim, books. What is priority to you in that moment? That's priority to you.
I don't infer that from this Mishnah.
What's also interesting, we learned from here that the books were already in translation, Greek or Roman or
Hold
whatever.
on. We have to go slowly. I told you there's a lot of very interesting topics that we're going to uncover one step at a time. So that's why I want to be a little bit systematic over here. But we can read really fast the Rambam. We're skipping many steps. I'm going to read this just so we have it on the side. Actually, no, not even. No, let's take this Gemara systematically. Just because we're going to be dragged in a lot of different directions. Let's put it like this. In short order, we're going to discuss other items that also are safe. The reason why I don't want to go down there is because we'll see Tosfos. There are a lot of different principles about why we may or may not save certain items. The point. So let's do this systematically or somewhat systematically. So we just started, and we'll, Dr. Bli Nether, if we don't address in the next few days other stuff, come back to me and we'll study the Rambam. I just don't want to. I want to, because we're going to use this to introduce certain building blocks that will be helpful down the road. But there's another question that we also need to ask, and I think you were getting at as well, or you said it, but so there's two questions. There's a fire. What can I save? That's number one. And Ellie's caveat was important. We're talking about a situation where the fire is not going to create a pikuach nefesh circumstance. We're not afraid of people being killed or harmed. We're concerned about stuff. So under such a circumstance, what can be saved? And then there's a second question, which is how do you save it? So our Gemara is going to assert, and Rashi explains, we're talking about taking stuff out of the fire, out of the area of the fire, saving stuff from fire by carrying it away. I just want to throw something in on the side, but then we're going to have to put it out of our mind. The Yerushalmi says something that we're going to find shocking. The Gemara Yerushalmi says that if you cannot get the stuff out of the house, one may even put out a fire. Anyone want to try to take a stab at the theory why the Yerushalmi would permit actually extinguishing the fire to save holy books? I'll give you a clue. It has to do with a machlokes of what it means. What it means to hold on. What L'tzorech Gufa means. The Gemara Yerushalmi says, I think we're going to quote it in Tosfos soon, or the Tosfos, one of the other Rishonim, I have to see. Where basically fire as a biblical malacha, according to at least some of the opinions that we learned about, that a malacha is only if it's l'tzorech gufa. If you're making the fire to create pechem, to create, Dr. Stamler, what do we say pechem was? The char, what's the better word for it?
What were you saying exactly? What was the what?
Charcoal?
Charcoal. If you're doing it to create the charcoal, so then you're making a fire litzorech gufa for what the fire is creating. So you make the fire and then you're mechabed the fire to have access to the pechem. That would be litzorech gufa according to a narrow, and this is not halacha l'maisa, but according to this, the opinion of Rabbi Shimon in litzorech gufa, right? Malacha shenetzrich legufa. So, but a fire that breaks out in your house, do you want that fire? We actually had this in Tosfos a while back.
Depends on your insurance policy.
Oh, so assuming you don't have insurance, do you want the fire? Absolutely not. Do you want to be busy putting out fires? Absolutely not. You wish there was never a fire. If there's a fire, you have no choice but to put it out. But according to Tosfos, and certainly the way the Yerushalmi understands it, that would be considered, in the opinion of Rabbi Shimon, as not l'tzorech gufa. And so, although rabbinically it's prohibited, the Chazal, according to the Yerushalmi, not halacha l'maisa, they might permit even putting out the fire for the sake of saving kisvei kodesh.
Rabbi, you seem to have discounted the danger to the life of the person going in to get these items. I don't know why.
For the sake of this exercise, the assumption is that there's not pikuach nefesh. Now, obviously, l'maisa, and that's why I said this whole Gemara can't be halacha l'maisa at this point, because generally speaking, we absolutely discourage civilians from going into a house to save anything. As a matter of fact, sometimes there is a necessity to physically restrain people who, God forbid, have a fire in their home to prevent them from going back inside, because God forbid, many Injuries and fatalities happen because a person chooses to go back into a burning building. So we have to, for the sake of this discussion, assume that it is not somehow dangerous to go inside. How that might be, I don't know. Because if your books are in danger, then ostensibly you're in danger. So, but therefore, we're gonna have to stick with that hypothetical just for the purposes of this discussion. Oh, Ellie, you're out of the car already? Shucks, I wanted to ask his passengers a question. All right, maybe we'll have to ask them tomorrow. Okay. I wanted to ask a question about Haftorah reading in their shuls. We'll get there.
Rabbi, we talk about a fire here, but would we automatically use the same criteria for a flood or something else?
Good question. Maybe. Likely. The Shulchan Aruch says in Shin Lamed Dalid, we could just open it up. You're gonna tell me I'm inconsistent at which questions I entertain and which ones I don't. That would be a fair criticism. Just this is, and also we shouldn't really skip to the halacha. We should go through the Gemara first. But let me see if I could find it. Shin Lamed Dalid Yud Beis. Look, there's a whole siman in Shulchan Aruch called Dinei Deleika B'Shabbos. Okay, you know what? I'm gonna get myself in trouble. Let's go fast through a few of these halachas. But then we're gonna have to forget them for the purposes of our Gemara. So I don't know if we're gonna walk out enriched or in trouble. If you have a fire, first of all, certain amounts of food can be saved. Shalosh sudot, and feed for animals. And you can invite other people to take stuff out. There are those who permit carrying money and other things that are muksa to save them because of the fire or other types of potential hazard like thieves. Because we waive the prohibition of muksa. Some prohibit even having a Gentile move your stuff. You take out food, take out better quality food.
But only a specific amount of food.
It discusses it. I'm just trying to give you a very fast overview. You can take out stuff for food for 3 meals. Even in 2 different kalim, but in one vessel, you can save as much as that vessel can hold. You can even spread out a garment and load it up with stuff. You can save kalim that you need for Shabbos. Wear as much clothing as possible, so you can carry that out as well. You can invite other people to save stuff as well for themselves. And he says, all of this is the Shulchan Aruch, which is going to confuse us when we get to the Gemara. So I may be committing Talmud teaching malpractice here. Whenever we discuss Hatzalah, here, we're talking about only from one courtyard to another courtyard without a chutzner. I'm sorry. That are part of an Eruv, but not if there is not an Eruv, and some people are even more lenient saying even that there's no Eruv. So basically the Shulchan Aruch is revealing to us that there are a lot of questions the Gemara really needs to clarify, which is what are the exact waivers, which malacha, which prohibitions are being permitted. Is it muksa?
Rabbi?
Hold on, I'm sorry, 1 second. Is it carrying from one Carmelist to another Carmelist? Is it even carrying into a public domain? And does it even extend to extinguishing fire? So there's a lot of different questions that need to be addressed. Professor, yes.
Yes, all this, I think, is under the assumption that putting out the fire is out of the question. Is this correct?
Not necessarily, but most likely. In other words, as Dr. Hammer pointed out, the odds of you being able to put out the entire fire are unfortunately less than saving the items. But beyond that question, the question that I brought up by quoting the Yerushalmi, who says you're allowed to extinguish a fire, well then, let me back up. The assertion is most likely you're not allowed to put out fire. Whether you can or can't is immaterial, assuming there's no life at risk. But you can do a more limited activity, such as saving the items. Now, what if you cannot save the items without extinguishing the fire? So that's the question the Yerushalmi asked. Yerushalmi would say, yeah, you can even put out a fire. And possibly our Gemara and our halacha would say, no, you unfortunately have to allow the fire to burn and not save those items.
Are we
I
also?
just want to remind everyone, we're in the very beginning of the discussion. I'm right now committing malpractice. Go ahead.
I might decide, like going back to what Dr. Hammer described, when the house is full of valuable things which are difficult to save, even if those allowed. It might be that you take the step of putting out the fire and take responsibility for Mezit with all consequences, just to make sure that you don't save those things one by one, which might turn out to be more difficult than putting the fire. With modern technology, definitely, but I think with ancient technology, they also had the capability to put out fires.
Yeah, I mean, you're right in the sense that in those days, I think it was purely a civilian effort in most cases to put out the fire. So today we have professionals, so we tell a person, don't go, don't get involved. But
Rabbi, maybe we could go so far as to say the word matzilin, to save them, includes putting out the fire.
That's what the Yerushalmi perspective that I told you here, I'm getting way ahead of ourselves, says, yes. But that's not the likely pshat in our Gemara. As a matter of fact, one of the reasons why there are restrictions, again, here we're like all over the place, but one of the reasons why there are restrictions regarding what you can save from the fire is a concern that the person in the process of saving all of his stuff will lose himself and end up desecrating Shabbos by putting out the fire. And so much so, as we'll see in Tosfos in a moment, it's possible that all of these restrictions only apply to a person's own home or own mavoy. And maybe none of these restrictions are extended to a stranger, because being that a stranger sees this purely as an abstract circumstance, maybe a windfall, or maybe helping a stranger, they're not going to be so consumed by panic that they'll forget their Shabbos observance. And now that we've totally shuffled the deck and totally confused and introduced ideas which are important to know, but just going to be a little bit more confusing in the process of studying our Mishnah, let's go back into the Mishnah. Well, actually, in a moment, for a moment, we'll take a fast peek at Tosfos. The Mishnah says, Rabbeinu Tam makes an important comment, which is not necessarily a consensus viewpoint, but let's see. He says, Kula Hypirka, the whole discussion here is exclusively when the fire happened in your courtyard or in your home. Kivan Sha'esh Sham, being that there is a fire in your abode, Vaday Bol, who he's very panicked. V'i Sharisale, if we're going to permit him to save stuff, Asi Lichabuye, all this stuff, he'll end up putting out the fire, which again, although I told you the Yerushalmi says that's acceptable, Rabbeinu Tam's take on our Gemara is obviously that is totally unacceptable. And this is committed with fire Gemara, as the Gemara itself will inform us going forward. But here's a big chiddush. If the fire happens in a stranger's house, well, then you can save everything. So we should have a mutual aid
Rabbi, sorry.
with our neighbors. If you have a fire, I'll save all your stuff. And if you have a fire, I'll save all of, or whatever, vice versa. Yes, Beryl.
Sorry, but the first question I would have, what do you do with a fire in a base medrash and a base knesset? Good
question. Do me a favor. Let's actually go back. Let's study the Gemara now. Let's pretend all of the matters that we discussed for the last 20 minutes we don't know.
Okay.
And let's see it from bottoms up. But I want to give you a limited answer, which is obviously, if you could save something from your home, you could save it from a base medrash too. According to Rabbeinu Tam, maybe even from, maybe according to Rabbeinu Tam, we could save everything. One more thing.
Can I put Can I put my 2 cents in?
Please do, yeah.
Why not?
You've got to use common sense also. I mean, let's say in those days, they were different than in these days. So in these days, if this happens, you've got your grandchildren sleeping upstairs in the bedrooms.
No, but that's
and
the
you're
caveat
cooking.
that we made long ago, which is that we're only talking about a scenario where there is no human life at risk, because the Torah allows all and any desecration of Shabbos for the sake of preserving human life. And that's why I advised us to see this Talmud in a purely hypothetical light at this point, because there are many, many, many reasons and scenarios, and also things that changed from, believe it or not, 1700 years ago till today, as far as, or at least to 1900 years ago and today, about which kind of books are in circulation and the like. So we have, of course, yes, and this is the caveat we made right at the outset, because I even remember Dr. Hammer's point when we talked about this long ago,
right?
That
fire and Teaneck.
A fire in Teaneck,
yeah,
or any, and there, unfortunately, every year there are stories around Hanukkah and Shabbos candles, and so absolutely we can do anything. We can waive any aspect of Shabbos for the sake of saving a life, and even a suffix, even if it's doubtful. So let's say if you're not sure there's somebody in the house, you then would also have to extinguish the fire. So we're talking about a very specific circumstance. The guy is a hermit, he lives by himself, or it's him and his wife, and he knows they're both outside. And then there's no homes around, as Ellie pointed out. So the only issue here is material jeopardy. And so then there's a discussion, what can be saved, what can't be saved, and etc.
Rabbi, just a quick, you're discounting animal life. You never sort of responded to the hierarchy. You say, where does that fit in? Before books, after books?
I'm not sure. It's a good question, because there are certain malachis or rabbinic things that we said are waived for animals. So I'm not sure. I don't recall. We'll have to keep our eyes out either in the text or in the commentaries to
because I think realistically today, a lot of people, and you see this in disasters, are going in after their pets.
Right.
And
right.
Yeah.
So again, I'm being honest here. I don't remember. Okay. I don't recall. And let's keep our eyes out to see if we'll have any halachic or Talmudic clues to that question. So it's an important question. It's a very real question. I just don't recall, and I don't know.
Well, if you can,
if it says save a life, a life is an animal too.
So I don't know.
But there's also a question. I mean, when you save the food, it says that you can save food not only for yourself, also for your behemoth. So if you can save food for the behemoth, then I'm sure you can save the behemoth itself also. That's a good
Talmudic logic. My question really was, and maybe you're right. My question was really about putting out a fire. Can you do if there's a biblically prohibited act? That was, I guess, my question. But you're right. If you're just carrying something out of the fire, obviously, or I should say, to me, it was obvious, but maybe we have to revisit and see. But that's a very good logic. If you're even allowed to save the food for an animal, we could then for sure save l'chora, the animal themselves. But I don't know if that would extend to putting out the fire. Let's allow the Gemara to teach us now the subject from ground up. Right now, we're talking about
one more thing to keep
hold on. Right now, we're talking about saving Sfarim.
Okay, so Rabbi, on Sfarim, if you accept in translation, can you go back and get your computer where you have Sfarim in?
Good question. I don't know, but it is a very good question. And Bli Neder will try to find at least one or two copies of Sheilot Utshuvot that ask about if we could equate a device that has on it. I'll tell you the short answer. Most likely, if we consider your iPhone a set of Talmud, you shouldn't be bringing it into the restroom. So,
right. Rabbi, there's an easier answer. We talked about food. If it says apple on that device, you can take it.
How many apples? How many Apple devices? Mazan shalosh sudot, shtei kelim.
Right.
All right. Let's dive back in here. I do want to tell you one other thing, which is for some reason, when I learned this Gemara, I was in Israel at the time, many years ago. For some reason, I don't remember. I don't have a lot of memory of this chapter. So I want your help. We'll learn it together as if we never studied it before, and we'll allow each topic to inform us. So we have to kind of put out of our mind any conventional sense of firefighting, and also any conventional sense of halacha, including the halachas and Shulchan Aruch or Rambam that we just read. And let's imagine we know nothing, and let the Gemara teach us stuff from bottoms up, and then we'll be able to explore halacha. And as I told you at the outset, a lot of the discussions here, and usually I wouldn't say this, are somewhat dated because there were certain changes in Jewish practice, and we'll discuss that if we like at length, but we need to first get started. Again, books, whether they're read or not, as Rashi says, Torah, Nevi'im, or Ksuvim, they may be saved from the fire. And we explained that we're talking about a area that's not a Rishus Harabim, but it's not there isn't a proper area of either. And then the Mishnah adds an important line, which is going to give us a lot of material to talk about. Now, even if these books are written in any language, to unim gniza, they need honorable disposal. Rashi. And in the Gemara, we'll see there's an opinion that says you're not allowed to read translations. You're not allowed to own and study from a translated biblical text. To them, Gneza, they still need honorable disposal. Rashi. You cannot just leave them outside. With the Gemara Mitaritz, the Gemara is going to discuss. So Rashi now gives us a very interesting caveat. Rashi says the whole discussion about a translated text not being permitted to be read should be talking about a work of ksuvim, v'loy anavim, but not neviim. Hold on, let me just see something. Yeah, so I believe he says we're talking only about a prohibition of having translated versions of Torah and Nevi'im, but not only prohibited to have a translation of Ksuvim, but there's no problem with having a translation of Torah and Navi. And he says, indeed, we have a translation from the Tanaic era, Targum Yonasim ben Uziel. Vani Omer Af ben Nevi'im. And Rashi says, I believe that this prohibition extended then to the Nevi'im too. So if I wanted to have clickbait, you know what I would have titled today's discussion? Rabbi, do I need to burn my art scroll? But that would have been clickbait. Long story short, there's going to be a discussion in the Gemara, and Rashi is giving us a heads up about the permissibility of having translated biblical texts. And we're going to discuss different languages. And it's an interesting discussion. And it's going to challenge our sense of reality, because today, Baruch Hashem, there's a vast and great proliferation of wonderful and diverse translations of almost every important Jewish text: Torah, Nevi'im, Ksuvim, Medrashim, Talmud Bavli, and now Talmud Yerushalmi, and Medrashim, and Hasidic works, and Maharal. So today we have everything translated. So we can't fathom a world where there were not translations, and we certainly can't fathom a world where the halacha precludes such translations. But that's exactly the conversation we're starting now, and we'll probably spend most of tomorrow talking about it as well.
Rabbi?
Yes.
Just to confuse it a little bit more, I once landed up in a motel, and there was a Bible next to the bed, a Bible, and it actually had the Old Testament and the New Testament, both. Okay, so I'm not sure whether that's only in English, whether that's worthy of including in saving.
Save half the book.
Right.
Rabbi, in what language did Onkelos write?
Aramaic. And so was Targum Yonasan. As a matter of fact, we'll see in a moment the word targum, although in Hebrew it means translation, it usually means Aramaic translation. All right. Why don't we read? Why don't we read in the text that we're describing that you shouldn't read? Ksuvim. Because, as Rashi explains, it would be a disruption of the study. All righty, here we go. So this is the Mishnah, a Mishnah that teaches us that you're allowed to save holy works from the fire, whether they're read or not. Even if they're in a translated language, they can be saved, and they would need Geniza, even if you're not allowed to read them. Why don't we read Ksuvim? Because there is a shear. And we don't want you to be distracted and what's the word? Captivated by the works of Ksuvim. According to Rashi, this whole text is about Ksuvim. You're not allowed to translate Ksuvim, and you cannot read Ksuvim on Shabbos. The Gemara is going to reopen and analyze this whole discussion. Itmar. We learned a discussion about translated Torah works. Rashi. Again, Aksuvim ka'amar. Hold on. Give me 1 second. Yeah, so Rashi, if you recall, in the Mishnah, had two opinions. That either we're talking about the prohibition of translating Ksuvim or all texts. So first he says we're talking about Ksuvim, then he says, but I believe that actually the Machlokes here in the Gemara is about translating all works. Tosfos has his opinion, as we'll see soon. Let's read again. Itmar. Ksuvim targum. If a text was written, a Torah text was translated in Targum, what language is Targum? As we just asserted, Aramaic. Or in any language, not Hebrew. What is the halacha? Rav Huna Amar ein matzil enoisem mipnei adleika. Rav Huna says you may absolutely not save a translated work from fire. Rav Chisda disagrees and said matzil enoisem mipnei adleika. You are allowed and you must save or may save even a translated work from the fire. So your stone chumash. Well, actually, this. Anyways. If you're of the opinion that you're allowed to study you're allowed to use and read a translated text of the Bible, well, then everyone agrees that he believes that you're allowed to save a work. If it's mutter to read, well, then certainly you should save it. What is the machlokes of Rav Huna and Rav Chisda? According to the opinion that says you're not allowed to read them. Even though you're not allowed to read them, Rav Huna says, "Ein matzilim." Being that you're not allowed to use this work, you're allowed to you should let it burn. And Rav Chisda says, "No, matzilin mishum bizoyin kisei hakodesh." Although this is a translation that's prohibited, it would yet be a shameful mistreatment of the holy scriptures. Rashi, aliba demand amar nitnu likros b'hem mutar likros b'kisei hakodesh aksum b'cholashin. The opinion that says you can read any translation. This discussion is primarily, Rashi says, Maseches Megillah. The ein bein svarim v'til mezuzos elash asvarm nechtav b'cholashin. As the Gemara says, Tefillin and mezuzos must only be written in Hebrew, in the original language. But a Torah may possibly, or all svarim that are not Tefillin and mezuzos can be written in any language. So according to that opinion, Rav Chisda and Rav Huna would say they believe you got to save the book. But if you're not allowed to read it, well, then there's machlokes if you save such a work. Who is of the belief that you're not allowed to read a translation? Rabbi Gamliel Polagalav Amar Afsfarim Leitido Sheichtavu Aliavanis. Torah works may not be translated in any language, with the exception of Greek. Tanan.
Why the exception of Greek?
Hold on. We'll get there soon. I would just Let's see the Gemara and then we'll go back to it. A Mishnah teaches that you're allowed to save all. Not a Mishnah. Our Mishnah says that you may save all works from the fire. Our Mishnah explicitly says you save a work no matter the translation. How would this square with Rav Huna saying you're not allowed to save such a work? Rav Huna doesn't have the rights. He doesn't have the ability to be choylek, to disagree with a Mishnah. Right? So again, doesn't this serve a big problem to Rav Huna says you're not allowed to save such a work? My love, is not the translation here. That which is read is Nevi'im. That which is not read is Ksuvim. Even though they're not allowed to be read, you still save them. And the Mishnah says you save them. This would be an emphatic and strong rejection of the opinion of Rav Huna. And Rav Huna should have to retract his statement because a Mishnah and Rav Huna cannot be in an argument. And so the Mishnah seems to strongly disprove Rav Huna's assertion, which is that books that can't be read can't be saved. Rav Huna will give a response. Rav Huna will say, can we rediscuss how you analyze the Mishnah? V'tizbara, let's figure it out. Ema Seifa, the Mishnah says, Tu'nim Geniza. The Mishnah also says that it needs to go to Geniza. Hashta Atzuli, Matzilinon, Geniza Mevayi. If you're saving the work, why are we putting it into Geniza? It's been saved. Rav Huna has his way of reading the text that supports his point. And Rav Chisda has a way to read the Mishnah. How would Rav Huna study the Mishnah? Rav Huna here's how he would teach you the Mishnah. When can you read it? I'm sorry. If it's written in another language, it's not saved. Even though there are certain works that you're not allowed to save and they might get burned, you still have to do Geniza. Again, here, when the Mishnah says, although it's written in any language, not that you save it, but to unim Geniza. Even though these are works that are not worthy of being saved, they are not so unworthy that you don't need to give them honorable burial. That's how Rav Chisda, that's how Rav Huna would read the Mishnah. So Rav Huna would say this Mishnah can be read in a way that supports not saving works that are translated that are not allowed to be translated. Rav Chisda would say, no, you're reading the Mishnah wrong. Here's how you read it. Even if they're translated, Nami Matzilin, you can also save them. You know what we're talking about? If a book breaks down and decomposes, or if a worm gets to it, well then the fragments need Geniza. Rashi Imbalu, if the books became worn out, Venasu recovered and they became all decomposed, or Afamakak rak vuvis shalachilas atloim tunim Geniza. If it became all chewed up by worms, whatever remains needs honorable burial. So again, just to recap real fast, we have Machlokes, Rav Chisda and Rav Huna about what to do with books that are translated and aren't allowed to be translated. Well, a book that you're not allowed to read that's translated, according to Rav Chisda, you still save it. According to Rav Huna, you don't save it. Rav Chisda could read the Mishnah in a way that seems to indicate his viewpoint. Rav Huna could read the Mishnah in a way that indicates his viewpoint, that even a work that can't be saved, it still needs at least Geniza.
Rabbi, what would be a book that you can't read?
I'm sorry?
What type of book would it be that you can't read?
Time of the Mishnah. there were opinions that said you're not allowed to own or create or have a translated work of Tanakh, of Torah, Nevi'im, and Ksuvim. Why? Let's look around a bit. Let's take a look at Tosfos before the why. The why will have to read a little more Gemara. So there are works that you're not allowed to read, namely translations, according to one opinion. So read this. This is very important. V'hashta, nowadays, Sfarim Shalano, our works, Matzilin, we may save them. Because, so here's the short story. Once upon a time, there was something called Torah Shebeksav. That was the 5 books of Moses, Nevi'im, and Ksuvim. Those were written works. And then you had the oral Torah, which is all of the substance that today is the Mishnah and the Gemara. And those texts were not permitted to be transcribed. They needed to be maintained exclusively in the oral domain from teacher to student. As a matter of fact, it was not allowed to be written down. Dvarim shebal peh efshar. Dvarim shebiksav. Things that are written can't be said bal peh, and things that are meant to remain bal peh cannot be written down. And therefore, ostensibly, if a person had a notebook from the shir of studying Mishnayos and he wrote those Mishnahs down before they were published, that might be a work that can't be saved, just like an unauthorized translation.
Rabbi, at the end of the day, do we consider things in Aramaic translated?
Yeah, that's what the Gemara says. Yeah. But again, there's a machloikas. That's what you have to remember. There was 2 opinions. One opinion says you can't have a translation, and Rabbi Gamliel says there can't be a translation.
So there's no special treatment of Aramaic.
No, there's a special treatment of Greek.
Yeah, that's what I found strange.
We'll see. We'll see soon in the Gemara, I believe, or maybe it's in a. We'll see soon. But most likely, the reason being that if a translation is not the actual words of the Torah, well, then according to Tosfos, it's like reading Baal Peh. That's not allowed.
There's a lot of ketubas that are written in Aramaic.
No, we're not saying you're not allowed to write Aramaic. You're allowed to write Aramaic. You just, according to one opinion, you're not allowed to write a translation of the Torah. The Gemara itself is going to bring us the citation, so that's why I'd rather see it in the Gemara's. No, we did this already. Hold on. Meisvei. Let's see other texts on the subject and see if we can square it off with what Rav Huna just asserted. There's a brisa that says, like, if the text is written in Aramaic, a Torah work was translated, v'chol or any other language, they may yet be saved. This is a strong refutation to what Rav Huna says. Rav Huna says that you may not save a translation. Rav Huna has an easy retort. Rav Huna responds, no, you're quoting me a brisa that embraces the opinion that there's no problem with the translation. So of course he says you can save it because he says it's kosher. But I am telling you that the opinion that says it's not kosher will tell you cannot save it. Tashema, let's try to bring some proof over here. A proof that will challenge Rav Huna. Hayiksuvim, get ready for this. Although I'm going to stop right now. Hayiksuvim, giftiness. It was written in Coptic. Modis, which I guess Coptic is the Egyptian language, right? Modis, Median, Ivrit, the Proto-Hebrew, the ancient Hebrew Ksav Ivri, what we would call the original font, Elamis, or the script of the people of Elam, of who does it say? The Elamites. We read about them in the Tanakh. Or Yavanis, or in Greek. Although one is not permitted to read this language. Please hold off on asking about Ivrit. I think we're going to have to dedicate we'll start tomorrow with that. Although you're not allowed to read these languages, you can save even prohibited scripts, prohibited texts. This is a big problem for Ravuna. Ravuna will say, no. You can't shut me up so easily. Tanoihi, this is not a brisa, that's a how do you call it? Consensus opinion. There's a matter of machlokes Tanya. Here's the brisa that I wanted to tell you about. If a text of the Torah, if you make suvim, or according to one opinion in Rashi, only ksuvim were translated, they must be safe from the fire. Rav Yossi disagrees and says, no, you can't save those texts. Rav Yossi gives us a beautiful anecdote. Story of my father, Mr. Chalafta, or probably Rabbi Chalafta, Rashi. Rabbi Yossi Chalafta Shmoy. Shahalach Eitzel Rabbi Gamliel B'Ribi L'Tveria. Chalafta went and visited Rabbi Gamliel B'Ribi. Rashi told us this is not Rebbe's son, but we're talking about the great Rabbi Gamliel. Ela Adam Gadol Kari B'Ribi. This is the great Rabbi Gamliel. And he was hanging out with Rabbi Yochanan, whose last name was Nazuf. Which Rabbi Gamliel are we talking about? Rashi says, who Rabbi Gamliel HaZakin? This is Rabbi Gamliel, the elder. Rabbi Gamliel Shahibadar Shachalafta, who Aviv Sharabina HaKadosh. We're talking about the great, or at least the grandfather of the famous Rabbi Yehuda Hanassi. And they are living in the era of the temple. So Rabbi Gamliel is sitting with Rabbi Yochanan Hanazov. And Chalafta arrives. And he sees Biyadai Sefer Iyov Targum. He sees that who's holding this Targum? Rabbi Yochanan is holding a translated work of the book of Job, of Iyov, and he's reading it. Amar Loi. Maybe I'm mixing things up. Hold on. Back up for a moment. Rabbi Yossi says there was a story with my father who was in Tiberia visiting Rabbi Gamliel the Great, who was at the table of Rabbi Yochanan Hanazov, who was holding a work of Iyov. Amar Loi, Chalafta says, Zechor ani, Rabbi Gamliel avi avicha, I remember your grandfather. So this is the first Rabbi Gamliel, who was standing on the Temple Mount. They view the fun of Sefer Iyov Targum, and they brought him this work, a translated Aramaic translation of the Greek. An Aramaic translation of Iyov. And he told one of the workers there, he told one of the construction foremen, do me a favor. Can you stick this book under or inside your row of stones? Get rid of this book forever. And he said, you gotta be going as you have to remove this book from circulation. And so, I'm sorry. And therefore, I believe we're saying here that Rabbi Yochanan Hanazov had to also get rid of the Sefer Iyov. Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda Amar, in a comment on the story, Rabbi Yossi, Rabbi Yehuda says, Areva Shaltit Kafolav. They even put a thing full of cement on top of the book to really make sure it was out of circulation. Amar Rebbe heard the story. He said, there are two small problems with the story. There's no mortar, there was no cement on the base of Mikdash on the Temple Mount. Even if you're not allowed to read the book, you're not allowed to destroy it. Rather, the story went as follows. He said, put it somewhere out of sight, out of mind, and then the book will decompose without needing to be destroyed. Period. So we're going to stop here. This is the brisa. I'm sorry, this is a lengthy brisa, which recounts with a lot of drama, a debate about the permissibility of reading and owning translated works of Eov, Rabbi Gamliel. Opposed, others permit. And tomorrow we'll wrap this up and we'll see how this affects or possibly challenges Rav Huna's viewpoint that you're not allowed to save or you may save certain works. And Bli Neder will also explore those different languages and we'll see what the language of Ivrit was or is. My dear friends, thank you for taking the first step into chapter 16 of Masechah Shabbos. It's just going to get more and more interesting from here. So I thank you for being on board. And I hope to see everybody tomorrow. Gesundheit and Freilichkeit. Thank you all so much. Have a wonderful day.